that is me, y'all. All right, we're recording.
All right. Well, thanks everyone for joining. This is Community Observations meeting number 8. It's crazy that Cassie and I have been doing this for 8 months now. This is going to be our last meeting for 2021. So really, really excited to have all of you here today. For those of you who don't know us yet, and maybe this is your first observations meetup, just quick intro of who we are. I'm Tiffany. I'm the Director of Community Operations at Venafi, which is a kind of like cybersecurity company. Couple loves. I'm pretty basic. I love food and wine. I love Disney. I am going to my 11th Jason Mraz concert next month. I'm obsessed, and I love Hawaii. And then recent ops project is, so we just launched our community in September, so a couple months ago. And now that we're starting to kind of like get everything flowing, I'm just making sure all of our reports and dashboards have the data integrity, that all of our integrations are talking to each other and working appropriately, and making a bunch of dashboards for all these different audiences and making sure that they're getting distributed appropriately. So that's been fun.
Yay. And I'm Cassie. I'm located in Austin, Texas, and I focus on community operations at Atlassian. I too am basic, and I love things like just hanging out with my family, quality time with the people that just fill my cup and my spirit, and then also just eating good food with those people that I love, or just by myself because food is amazing. But current ops project is Team 22 planning. We're going back to having our in-person annual conference. So we're tasked with planning the workshop for our community leaders, and then also what that experience of the community lounge will look like on the expo floor. So all the fun things that come with that. I mean, while it can be stressful, I'm not going to lie, I'm really excited to see people in person again. So that's what I'm currently working on. And just before we get started, a few housekeeping notes that want to let y'all know that cameras are totally optional. We do love engagement in the chat. So if you have any questions or just love what somebody's saying, feel free to hop in the chat. And then also, if you have any questions or want to present something in the future, need some advice, you can always email us at opsforcommunity@gmail.com. And we also like to plug that we are in 2 community Slack workspaces. So if you're in the CMX Slack workspace or Community Club workspace, you can reach us there as well.
All right. So can you click one more time, and then I think the star should show up.
Oh, there it goes.
There it is. Look at that animation fanciness. So we are in our 4th month of the Ops Top Dog series. Ops Top Dogs, for those of you who don't know, is a framework that was created by Holly Firestone to kind of encompass all the different things that a community operations person does. And so we're on track, and that's everything related to reports and dashboards, insights, metrics, finding trends within your community. And we have 2 amazing speakers lined up today. Next slide. There we go. We have Amanda and Nick joining us. I will let them do their intros when they start their sessions, but give it up for them. And we're super excited to have you. Thank you for coming. And Amanda, I'll pass it off to you.
Great.
Sorry, I guess Cassie will pass it off to you.
I'm going to drop a link into a mural. You're welcome to come in if you are a person who likes to stare at stuff. I know I am, but I'll also share my screen. So thank you for having me. I'm so excited to be here. Well, that's not what I was supposed to send. Cassie, do you think you can send that invite link?
I can. Let me go grab that real quick.
All right. So thank you so much for having me. I've got my timer going because I can natter on. And as you can see, I made a really big mural, but we're not going to talk about most of it. So what I wanted to talk today about was data plunges and kind of like the different levels of data that you want to show, depending on who is coming in and looking at your data. So I wanted to start with kind of introductions, introduce you to Mural, talk about data and community in general, and then do some examples of data plunges. And then if we have time, kind of go into sharing up and generic dashboards, but I figured we'll probably not have enough time to get through data plunges. So what is Mural? We're a visual collaboration software. So we are basically the whiteboard in any office around the world and the sticky notes in any office around the world in digital form. We launched our community back in June, and I'm on a team of 4 people. So I do a lot of ops work, and then I also manage content. So who am I? I live in Vermont. I love the cold. I am a nerd. I love nature. I love counting things. And I took a long road to get here, and it started way back in 2005 when I was a young cancer survivor and joined my first online community. So if you're interested, follow me on Twitter, connect on LinkedIn. I would be really happy to chat.
Hey, Amanda, quick note is I'm not sure if you mean to be sharing this, but we see the open Zoom meeting window right now. If you
Good
meant
job.
to be sharing something else.
Nope. How about that? Can you
There
see
we
it now?
go. Yes, we see the mural
You
board.
see do you see the giant pink thing? Okay.
We see
perfect.
that, yeah, with the wings.
Fun fact, Mural has 2 brand colors. We have hot pink and white. And so I just repurposed my general metrics dashboard for this. So let's talk about data. I think everybody here who is into ops and is into data and is into really fundamentally, how do you tell a story about community? We know that the data is important, but I think that one of the things that's helped me a lot in the last few years is really understand that the story that I need as a community manager is not necessarily the same story that leadership needs. Leadership is really caring about ensuring ROI. So the stories that they're wanting to look at are things that are proving that the community is paying off from their perspective as the people who are in charge of, fostering our company and moving our company forward. So that's like, we want to use that to increase headcount, increase funding, access needs for community. I feel like, at least when I started and kind of in general, we spent a lot of time focusing on that particular column. And what I wanted to spend some time talking about is like the other side of the data track and the other stories that we need to pay attention to. Because within the work that we do, it's really easy to throw stuff on the wall, see if it works, and move on. When if we kind of step back and think about what are the questions that I need to understand so that I can make better strategic decisions, we end up with very detailed, very internal, very quantitative data, right? Like I am happiest when I have a giant spreadsheet of category, discussion topic, number of comments, number of replies, but no one else other than my other community manager really needs to see that. Like we need that as community managers to make good decisions about the content that we're doing and the relationships that we're building. But that specific column of information is incredibly internal and almost overwhelming to most people. And one of the challenges when you're sharing different types of data across the community is that, and about the community, is that you have to filter through what you need and what everybody else's needs so that you present a cohesive picture so that everybody can participate. And let me know if there are questions. So I used to run data in real life situations, and people would get really stressed out because we were counting actual behaviors that people were taking in specific circumstances. And a common question was like, oh my gosh, I have to do this all the time. The reality is with data, the data needs to be on, the systems need to be turned on so that we're collecting the information that we need. But that does not mean we have to look at every single piece of data every single minute of every single day or even monthly. And so this concept of data plunges is incredibly important as you're making strategic decisions because they allow you to look at the giant massive data that you have and hone in to answer specific questions. And what we're answering, of course, depends on kind of like our community development stage and our org alignment. So because we're aligned with marketing, because we're a brand new baby community, the questions that I'm doing data plunges on are not going to be the same questions that Salesforce is going to be doing data plunges on. It's not going to be the same questions as TeamViewer or Alteryx. It's going to be very focused on where we're at our developmental stage. Does that make sense before I jump on to our next steps? Okay, beautiful. So what is a data plunge? basically we need to frame a question. And a couple of months ago on Community Roundtable, they did this amazing presentation from the C-level. So they had a bunch of C-level people come and talk about data. If you haven't watched that, I'd recommend it. I wish I could find the recording. I'll ping them and find out where it's at. But they were like, hey, create a backlog of data questions because we're going to have a million questions that we need to answer. So once we frame the question, evaluate the data that you have, because we need to start with what we have, not necessarily what we want or what we necessarily need. And we need to answer that question with the data that we have access to and as in our little grubby fingers. So you'll see that when we get into our tools, how many different tools we use is totally up to the tech stack that we currently have. And then make those decisions based on what we find and evaluate it over time. So one of the things that came up when we first started and launched our community is we realized, hey, I think we have a lot of international community members. And this was presenting a challenge, right? How do you run a contest internationally? How do you set up a real-time events with people in APAC and people in Europe and people in Africa and people in South America? How do you create culture and connection across the globe between practitioners who are all facilitators? And so what we did was we took a very quick data plunge at the very beginning, because we were trying to, honestly, where this came from was we were trying to send presents to our early access people, and we couldn't send them to like 60% of the early access people because they lived outside of the US. So we take the data, we house it, like looked at it, 60% of our community, like the people who have registered and logged in and participated, are international. Of our most active members, 80% is international. So this data plunge gave us the data that we needed to come back and do some cross-functional planning around how do we change these contest rules. Yes, we know it's a pain legal for you to go and research rules in every single country, but we got to do that. How do we focus on async events? And how do we offer content that's season agnostic? Like, yes, people in Australia are used to seeing winter themed stuff in December, but isn't it better to offer both, right? Like if you're going to do snow, why aren't we also doing surf for Australia? So we used a bunch of that data to kind of change our approach to content and our approach to events. And then we actually decided after this data plunge that this is something we need to pay attention to, because interestingly enough, the people who visit our site, most of them are American. So the active people are international, and the people coming to just consume the information and read that way and participate that way are actually in the States. So that was a really interesting result. And because there's that difference and because it might change, I do a monthly check on it. So another example of a data plunge, the question that we were looking at is like, is Template Tuesday, which is a content effort that we do every Tuesday, impacting member behavior? We know that when somebody comes into a mural, if they start from a template, they are much more likely to be successful using that template long-term. They are much more likely to be happy and connected in the community because they know how to use this giant whiteboard. With Mural and other products like this, if you think about it, it's like classic blank page symbol. Like, what am I doing next? I don't know where to start. So we have this Template Tuesday where we're showing up the new templates. We're offering tips on how to build templates. We're doing all sorts of fun stuff. We're bringing in template experts to talk and doing async AMAs. Is that work? Doesn't matter. You know, so one of the things that we did, and there's different ways that we're understanding this. Like we could also go to the consumption. Oh, I have another window open. That's fun. I wonder where it's at. Okay. We found out that 26% of our registrations are on Tuesday, 21% on Wednesday. That means between those 2 days, we have roughly like 47% of our registrations coming in every week on those 2 days. Now, does that mean like correlation is not causation, right? Does that mean that Template Tuesdays are the driving factor in that? Possibly. We do a lot of social work. We have good engagement on the social. We see good data coming through, right? Could it be something else? Sure, we'll find out. But what we do know is we have indication that it is actually helping people come to community and at least take that first step in. So when we think about data plunges, like the above one, the first one where we're talking about international stuff, yes, of course, it was very clear that we could see that. In the case of Template Tuesdays, it's more like a dart in the general direction of the bullseye, and it's telling us that we need to keep looking at this. So one of the questions that we led from the strategic decision, which was, yeah, let's keep allocating time for Template Tuesdays. Does that pattern hold out? And then we need to decide, is there something else that might be contributing to this? So I've got two more to talk about. And, you know, one of the questions that's like eternal that we need as community managers to pay attention to is who's coming back and how are we nurturing them? So the first question is, are people coming back to community after they register? The chart that's on top is actually a date from registration to, or last seen to now. So you can kind of see like, it's a comparison of when people are coming in and how many people are coming in at and how long they stay active, basically. And then that is done in Airtable. And then the one below is actually pulled from Tableau, and it's showing our percentage of visits and 2 visits and more than 2 visits. It's pretty common in community to have a pretty substantial drop off after 1 visit because, you know, not everybody is going to want to come back. Not everybody's going to want to log back in, right? And depending on how you see this data, like it's going to kind of shift your numbers. But what we do see is if someone comes back more than twice, they are more likely to keep coming back. And this actually plays out. It's not just muralistas, which is what we call ourselves internally, it's also external people. So what we are learning is basically like, those people, instead of chasing the people who are the 1 visit and gone, let's chase the people who are coming for more than 2 visits. Let's figure out how to do a good welcome process and do some experimental changes. When we first started, we were actually not allowed to have notifications. And we noticed that that 1 visit was a huge chunk of our people. And so when we did this data plunge, I was able to go and say, hey, can we turn off on notifications if someone comments on someone else's posts? Can we turn on notifications for a few other things, right? So we're not spamming people with notification. We're just showing them if someone talked to them. And we did that, and that the pie of 1 visit started shrinking. So long-term, what are we going to be doing? You know, that foster the people who are coming back is where we need to focus some of our experiments. And we're going to be thinking about how to do those welcome experiments a little differently. And finally, I feel like I'm talking a lot. Okay, finally, what type of content is resonating with people? So this is seeded content that we put in place based on us giving little gifts to our community members to start the conversation, to demonstrate what you can and can't, you should share in community. And what we learned from this data plunge, and you can't really, I tried to keep it small so it wouldn't like eat everything up. But what we learned is I pulled comments, votes, and interactions, and I dumped it into a Google Sheet so that we could see it. The questions had a lot of interactions and a lot of comments, but over time, because EA made us look really, really conversational, like we would post something like, what's your best icebreaker? And people are still talking about that. But in EA, we got like 12 responses because the people that we were testing in early access were all expert facilitators. So of course that they wanted to have those conversations, right? So over time, this is going to change. And we realized like, hey, we actually need to de-emphasize these questions because not everybody is using them. Polls tended to work okay. But again, we weren't getting necessarily the idea of like more comments and more meaningful conversations, right? So what we did learn from this data plunge is that people want to talk about the product and they want to read about templates and quick tips. They don't necessarily want to show their templates that they're working on. They don't necessarily want to talk about thought-provoking questions. It's kind of like community managers having a community to talk about community in. Some of us want that, some of us don't want that. So we really are using this type of data plunge to help us hone in on what our strategy is going to look like for Q4. So yeah, and the big question that's coming from this is part of the reason people aren't sharing is there's no safety in a public forum. So what we want to do is create that culture of safety and then, you know, come back and do some experiments on that and see, hey, did this impact us? So various tools that I use, we are in the process of looking at other tools right now to kind of supplement our tech stack. We also use Marketo. I don't know why that I don't use it, but Marketo is part of our tech stack. All right, that's it. The rest of the stuff that's on here is really in that ROI column, and it's for your own information. The tips for sharing up and out was really came from that roundtable stuff. And then if you go into the mural, I'm going to exit out, and you go to the outline section, anything that's below questions is basically, this is what kind of like my generic dashboard looks like that I modify for everyone. All right, all done. I did it. Any questions?
Awesome.
Or do
Thank
we
you
wanna
so
skip
much, Amanda. This was
straight to
great.
You're
I
welcome.
think if anybody has questions, we can do that now. I think we have enough time. I mean, I will kick us off because this was amazing. I was curious about Template Tuesdays, and apologies if I missed it, but who is responsible for posting the templates? Like community members, leaders, your team?
Yeah.
I found that very fascinating.
Yeah, thanks, Cassie. So who's responsible for Template Tuesdays? I serve as kind of a program manager for it, or facilitator, and I work with our internal templates team to create content for it. And then we also are working on expanding it so that we can have community members help us on Template Tuesday too. And we just had and launched our template contest. And we have 3 that are up for vote right now. If you're interested, you can go vote on them, but we're using it to teach people how to share templates and how to vote on and talk about good ideas.
I love that.
I have a quick question too. Amanda, this was so timely and helpful. As you guys can see, I have my soup with me. So I appreciate being off video so I can make it. I have 2 questions. I'm curious, how do you, when you're thinking about questions that are pertinent and relevant to ask for your audience, how are you gauging like this is the question for right now versus maybe like external factors of like, we really want to like understand this correlation of community and sales? And then attached to that, do you often, one of the things I find myself struggling with is I can show data about like someone comes into the community, then their purchase price might be larger than if they didn't, but that feels like correlation, not causation. How do you attack both sides of those like priorities? And then also like, does it make sense?
That is such a good question. And I think that from my perspective, it depends on where you're at in your community growing process. Because at the beginning of a community starting and forming, it is not, it's like a startup, right? Like startups aren't profitable, they show promise. And so the questions that we're thinking about here and how we talk about it is all about showing promise. Correlation is not causation, but strong data plunges that are showing consistent correlation over time tends to be a better way to talk to people about it, right? And being like, hey, we noticed a spike in increase in new members over the weekend during the template contest. Is this related to or not? And the way I think about it is I ask that question, and then I ask questions that are going to disprove my question, right? Like, how else can this be explained, and run correlating like side-by-side data plunges to see if there's a different reason. Yeah. In terms of ROI, that's like a very complicated question, but yeah, like people will ask, but basically we want to understand the play, and the question becomes, if somebody's active in community, are they adopting new templates? Are they adopting new features at a greater rate? Are they retaining their stuff? Do we have stickiness?
Great. Any other questions for Amanda?
I'd like to ask one if you don't mind.
Yeah, of course, Scott, go ahead.
Yeah, awesome talk, Amanda. Thanks for sharing. But one question I do have is, I guess, in the construct of your team, I know you mentioned you're 4 now. So it looked like you have a little bit of bandwidth to dive into the data. I guess, like, where's a good starting point for a team that's really tiny? Like, I'm team of 1, now moving to team of 2. And we're struggling just to keep our head above water with the growth. Never mind the data time. So I really just, I guess, how do you get help? How do you best dive into it? Where do you focus? And I think we may have
Oh.
lost her.
I think we lost her.
Hopefully I don't have to repeat that question.
Does anyone have any insights or answers or recommendations for Scott? Small team is hard.
All right, Scott, could you repeat the question?
I knew he was going to ask.
Apologies.
That.
Yeah, can you repeat the question?
I guess I'm trying to, I'll try to abbreviate it. A short is
Okay.
basically in a small team where you don't have the bandwidth and time basically to get into the data sometimes because you're just trying to keep your head above water and running the community. What are some of the sort of key metrics or pieces that you kind of take a look at and how best to kind of tackle those, I guess?
So in a small team with limited resources, to me, when I've been running that way, the most important thing is to prioritize the questions that you're paying attention to, right? And really figuring out what the people who are your sponsors, what they need to see and what your team and you need to see to make strategic decisions. Because if you're always swimming and you're never looking up, it's going to be really difficult for you to make strategic decisions based on data, right? So really honing in on what are our key priorities and what are the metrics we need to understand here, and then what are the metrics that my sponsors care about. Understanding those two things will help you prioritize the data that you need to look at. And I think that's part of the benefit of the data punch, right? Like if you set up your data so that it's always running, then you come in with a question, you can just go in and look instead of worrying about setting everything up before, right? Like, oh, I need this question, so I need this data and this data, this data. Like set your systems up, even if it's like basic analytics, even if it's basic, like I want to understand which people are talking about what for the most amount of time, right? Just pick your project and focus on that. And think about it like if you're doing open water swimming, you're not sitting and like swimming with your head up all the time, you would die, right? I mean, unless you were superhuman. So what you do is you pick your head up, you look across the ocean or the river or whatever you're swimming in, and you put your head back down. And in smaller teams, getting good at that becomes more critical.
Thank you.
All right. I will
All right. Well,
pop off and feel free to LinkedIn me, feel free to tweet at me on Twitter. Like I love chatting about this stuff, y'all. It's my favorite thing. So thank you, Tiffany and Cassie, for having me.
thanks so much, Amanda. Lovely presentation. Today I learned what a data plunge is. So cool. All right. So Nick, passing the baton on to you.
All right. Let me get to my presentation and share my screen, and then I hope y'all be nice enough to tell me if you can actually see my static face, even when I present.
Looks
Yeah,
good.
looks good.
Seeing thumbs up. All right, wonderful. Yeah, so my name is Nick. I'm on the socials as well. I work at Comsor, as I think was mentioned before. I'm working on product there, so that's why I think I was pushed forward to talk today about like metrics and everything. And then I'll explain a little bit about like how I got into that, like how I ended up here, how I think about metrics and your goals, what we should observe, and how to make sense of that. And then we can do a little AMA after that. This is what I look like without Photoshop. I am from the Netherlands originally. I moved to Berlin, Germany. That's where I am right now. You can see that from the little scruffy wall behind me. I'm in Berlin since about 8 years ago when I moved here. If you want to praise me on social media for this amazing talk, you can use my pronouns there. When Tiffany and I spoke about talking here today, I did a little bit of research into whole sort of like ops top dogs, and I figured I can use this as an opportunity to make a presentation full of all the pictures that I've taken of my dog over the last year. So sorry, not sorry, but this is Waffle. She's going to be helping me tell the story today. So she's a 1 year and 4 months now. Yeah, Brussels Griffin. She lives with me and my partner here in Berlin, and we're blessed to take care of her and give her all the cuddles that she needs. Right. So how did I end up here? A couple years ago, I started working for a startup called Retention Grid. And what we did is we built a Shopify app to help e-commerce stores sort of make sense of all the data that they have. They mostly had databases full of buyers with some of the data of what they bought, when they bought it. And we dusted off an old concept from the Sears catalog in the US that looks at frequency and recency of purchases to figure out if people still should get should be sent a new catalog. We figured that same sort of metric is helpful to figure out like who to pay attention to and what kind of attention to pay to them when you think about your customers. I started that job as my first job here in Berlin, my first job in tech. I actually started as a community manager, which back then meant catering to our social media, but also talking to our freemium users, which were about like 10 to 15,000 e-commerce shops, and trying to figure out also using our own model, who is sort of most important there. Of course, people who are paying us money are very important, but also how do we maintain sort of a larger community there? I started something called Silicon Drinkabout because I had no friends. I was new to Berlin and ended up hosting over 200 events. It was every Friday. We met up here in the city, and anybody who was interested in working in tech or setting a company or is new to Berlin was able to join. So I also know what it's like to host real in-person events, how to be completely dependent on a social network like Facebook to gather all the data and have access to that or not have access to that. I did not make any money with that. It was completely a voluntary thing for fun and to learn people and to get to know people and to help people find their way in a new city. After that, Retention Grid got acquired by LiveIntent, an advertising technology company where I worked on products for a little while. Advertising technology is a little bit evil, so as soon as an old coworker told me, just quit your job and come work with me and we'll starting this company called Hype Partners, I dropped everything to go work again with some of my old coworkers. We build an agency that helps organizations in the Web3 world, sort of like the crypto blockchain world, to build developer communities, to build communities of enthusiasts in that space that want to focus on specific projects, building on top of existing protocols. And what we did there is, we built new channels for people. We hosted events. This is am I going forwards? Let's see. Yeah, there we go. This is a picture actually of an event that we did in Japan where we created a temporary community around an event there, and it got so busy that we stopped traffic in the streets and the police had to come, which is a lot of fun. But at the end of all of these things, whether it's in-person events or online communities, we'd always get the question of like, prove me that there's ROI on what you're doing. If you think your boss is annoying and asking you a lot about like, prove me that you're worth your money, your team, whatever, you can imagine what a client feels like for an agency. So we started looking at this from like a perspective of how can we build something that can prove that what our team is doing is actually valuable. And we started with a small team, and it was just about asking questions, building a report, figuring out what have we done this week or this month. But Hype Partners grew to a global remote team of about 75 people in over 25 countries. It was sort of designed that way because we wanted to have customer support, community management in those 3 different 8-hour time zones so that we can cover the whole globe. But it got a lot harder as we grew the team, as we grew our client list, with all the things that we were doing to keep track of what was successful, and that we were actually moving the needle for our clients. So from that, I started going down into the magical world of spreadsheets. And I assume that I can't see everybody, but assume that there's pain in a few people's eyes. I do love Google Sheets and I love what it can do, but I did figure after a while of building information, connecting APIs into it, that we needed to sort of really up the ante there and build a proper tool out of it. That tool became something that we called Ports. Did I click to the next slide? Let's try that again. There we go. Which is Ports, which I started building in late 2019, throughout 2020, specifically when the pandemic hit. We thought like, we're an agency. We also do in-person events. Maybe we should focus on something else that's a little bit more scalable than an agency. And I can say that Ports worked very well. We got some really great users out there, specifically in the developer relationships world. But it was really designed to help with any community manager measure their work, measure their community. And we did so well that Comsor reached out to us and say, you know what, we love what you do. Why don't we join forces and build something together? And that led to the acquisition of Ports a couple of months ago. And ever since, I've been at Comsor. Right, so that's enough about me. I wanted to talk a little bit about metrics in the other few minutes that I've got left. I watched Holly Firestone's initial conversation about ops top dogs, and I felt a little pressure to come up with my own acronym and bring Waffle back to the table, of course. So I decided to break it down into a couple of steps, which is what are the organizational goals, address your hypothesis, follow the data, focus on people, make data actionable. That's not even a word, and the end. All right, that's enough dad jokes maybe for today. Maybe I should not try to force the argument. The point to it being, though, there's an excellent article that was written by, get her name correctly, Jamie Lengskov, about the scientific method of community metrics. And it links back to a lot of what Amanda was saying about hypothesis, about the fact that, correlation does not imply causation, and that we need to be aware of that. But to go one step back, I think the point in the article that drove it most home for me in terms of what my experience was working with clients is that when we talk about ROI of community, when we talk about metrics of community, that it's really important to start with setting your goals and look for somebody on the executive level, if your organization is that big, to buy into that and to make that commitment to those goals together. Out of that will fall KPIs. And it's important when we talk about metrics later, because it's those KPIs that are tied into your goals that define what we should be looking for in the data that we're going to be mining. And again, to point out what Amanda was saying earlier, again, it is all about writing your hypothesis and testing that. It is about checking, am I right about something? Because it's not just about proving to the rest of your organization that you're important and that your job is important, but it's also going to be driving, if you do everything well, it's going to be driving the actions that you take within your organization, the information that you're going to be passing on to your coworkers in marketing and sales, et cetera. And you want to make sure that you're right. Then it's about, of course, the data. How do we collect the data? Can we do it automatically? Is this a manual process? Where are we getting the data from? What data points are we looking for? Then it's then when we talk about that data, I really think of that data in terms of activity. It's most likely what it will consist of. What is the activity? What are the touch points that I'm seeing in my community with me? And with that also comes sort of a larger conversation of what do I consider to be part of my community? Is it everything that happens within our siloed Slack account or within our siloed forum? Or does it also mean somebody who is talking about me on Twitter, somebody that's having a conversation when I'm not in the room on something like Stack Overflow? I fall on one side of the argument, but this really depends on how you think about community and how you think about where your reach sort of like starts and ends. I think that activity will then guide you to think about what people are in my community. And I always say, like, focus on the people. The activity will tell you sort of what's going on. The people will tell you where those activities are coming from. And that will probably also make your data most actionable. It's like, what's going on, who is doing it? And that will get you a lot beyond just measuring and saying, cool, now I got a dashboard. But I forgot who I'm quoting here, but somebody once told me that, it's not just about telling somebody that you got a headache. It's also about what's the painkiller, or, do I need to drink more water to just get rid of that method? So I want to dive a little bit deeper into that data, the focus, and the action components of that, because I think that those are the parts that can really make you, into your community superhero, like Waffle here, my assistant is showing. The first part is maybe the easiest part, which is to consider where to collect your data from. So consider all these places where community activity exists. It might be happening, in Slack where you're paying attention, but it might also be happening in places like Discord, Stack Overflow, Twitter, where you might not be paying as much attention. It might even happen on Twitter where people do not tag you into the conversation, maybe purposefully so, maybe not. So even on Twitter, it might, we might need to look beyond just the notification stack to see what's going on really. Then about collecting that data, again, that's a real question of how to do it. What I've done in the past is I've grabbed somebody that's a lot more technical than I am, asked them if they can build some API integrations for me. We did that again with Google Sheets to get information from a place like Stack Overflow and looked for, are there developers, because that was our community that we're focusing on, are there developers that are talking about the specific technology of my clients? Because that will show me that both people are having questions about it, will have answers about it, but it will also allow us to start thinking a little bit about like what that activity is telling us. And that's sort of where that focus piece I think comes in. It's a lot of information depending on what you look for and where you're getting that information to pull that into a Google Sheet. And I can tell you, this is sort of where Google Sheets already started like getting a little painful, especially when for the developers, technical people among us, when I started looking for something as general as JavaScript on Stack Overflow, you're getting so much information that it's really hard to sort of like find the gold nuggets in this. So when you even getting this data, searching for the right stuff is very, very important. How can I, when I look on Twitter, how can I make sure that I find people that are talking about me and not just something that my name is connected to? I was talking to somebody who works at the company Postman. Great tool. I love using it, but with a name like Postman, there is so much information that you're going to be finding out that is not related necessarily to you. And then it's all about like, how can I filter that further to get the right information? Like I said before, this is basically a list of activities. This happened by this user at this time frame, and here's maybe a little bit more color to what that is. From that information, we can start to identify people, and we can start to group them together and figuring out, okay, well, what did those people do? If you're handy with Google Sheets or Excel, you can figure out like how to write a query for that. It's not so complicated. With that, we can figure out that Alex Fu, for example, did 245 activities, and we saw that the last one, based on the timestamp, the most recent one, was 8 days ago. That's useful information. At least it is for me, because more than just doing reporting and seeing, hey, the total amount of activity went up, I can also now see a little bit more about Alex Fu and what they've been doing. like I said before, where you're pulling the data from depends, and what the total count will tell you also will depend a little bit. For example, if somebody liked 240 of my tweets, honestly, I might not care that much about it. If somebody likes 240 of my personal tweets, right, that might indicate that I need to close my blinds in the evening. But compared to, for example, information on GitHub, if I, again, am catering to something like developers and I want people to join in on our open source project, or I want them to build cool stuff on top of our API, I care maybe a lot more about those 5 activities that happened on GitHub than on Twitter. So very simply, by multiplying that with some kind of weight or some kind of point system, we can quickly get to a little bit more color of what that is. And with that, you can figure out, cool, Alex Fu is the winner. He's like the highest, the most active, most important person in my community. Was active, last active 8 days ago. Good, nothing to worry about. Then I might see that Robin Barr was active 60 days ago, has been quite impactful for my community. So maybe I now need to keep an eye on somebody like that that's sort of slipping away. And at the same point, I might see some people that have very little points, but were active just today or 1 day ago. So maybe I need to do something now about Angel and maybe invite them back into the community, see what they've been doing, welcome them, connect them to somebody that's been in the community for a little bit longer. Anything that we can do to really sort of bring them in and get that retention machine going. So that's all fun and games when you've got free community members. What if you got like 80 or 1,000 or 20,000, especially when we're talking about these open platforms, the numbers are going to go up fast. And how we organize them is, this does not become that useful anymore, because selecting these people, making them line up based on the amount of activities is just not that useful when you've got 20,000 people, unless you've got a lot of coworkers that can go and sift through that information. My answer for that, if you got a large data set, is segmented into smaller sections. So tell them to line up, not just in one line, but think about multi-dimensions and think about the dimension that matter to you. So with that, we can start thinking about different segments, different personas that we can create based on the metrics that we have. Right. So before I said you can give points to what type of activity people are doing. That can give us a bit of an idea of like who's impactful, and then maybe the size, like the frequency of how often they've been there, or maybe when the last time was, can give us a little bit of color of like where they are sort of in this grid. Segmentation is important because it lets us view these kind of like giant communities into bite-sized chunks and fit these personas to them based on that. And consider, for example, that people who might not do many impactful things that are in your community, but not very active in your community, we can might be able to consider them as observers, people that are lurking. They're not necessarily contributing. There's nothing wrong with that, but we might want to treat them in a different way. Then you got maybe people who are more impactful and very frequent. We can consider them contributors, all the way to super fans. And looking at things this way will give you a little bit of a strategy out of the box, but also will allow you to keep an eye on what's happening within these segments. Maybe if I'm going to spend this whole week just looking at my potentials, people with higher impact, I can then dive into that set and see, okay, well, who is most active most recently, or who has done specific tasks within my community that I really care about, or maybe things that are very much on the fringe. So these are all sort of like things that you can do once you start breaking it down. And I think going back to sort of like that build acronym that I introduced, this will allow you, I think, to tie that back to your goals and your KPIs, but actually make it actionable in a way that you can say, all right, I now know sort of what to do with these kind of people because I understand what persona sort of they are. If you feel after all of this, like, I don't even want to get out of bed anymore, this is terrible, I already hate spreadsheets, and I can imagine what kind of formulas that that will produce. This is actually a real spreadsheet that I made. This is a real formula that I made. It does work, but with the kind of queries to do these kind of things, it's not complicated. They're just long, and it's going to take quite a lot of stress on the Google servers, which I might not care about, but I do need to be a lot more patient when I want to run this information for larger groups. And just to end all of this with a shameful plug, of course, you can do that a lot easier because I built a tool for that. That tool got absorbed by ComSor. And that's exactly what we're trying to do. If you want to build this out all out on yourself, like me, do it. I'd love to take a look at what your spreadsheets look like, have that conversation on Twitter or here, and sort of like geek out about all of that. If you guys even like spreadsheets anymore. Otherwise, we're actually just building out that tool that just brings in that data automatically, and it analyzes that and tries to sort of like find these nuggets of wisdom and give you an actionable insight after all of that. These are the places where you can find me to talk to me about any of these things. And of course, also shameful plug for Waffle, who is on Instagram if you want to follow for more of these cute pictures. And that's all I got for you.
Thank you, Nick. Waffle is so cute, and my dog Yoshi will be following him shortly. All right.
I did not keep an eye at all like the questions and everything in the chat. So
there was a lot of fun about being triggered by spreadsheets and the data lake or the data swamp. And yeah, I think you hit the nail on the head for a lot of us.
Good. Are there any other questions? If we still have time for them.
We got like a minute or two. Any other questions for Nick? All right. Well, Nick did provide his socials. So if you have any questions or want to reach out or want to learn more about ComSor or Port, please feel free to reach out to him. Thank you so much, Nick. That was a great presentation, and loved Waffle. All right, a couple more minutes left just to close out. So as I mentioned earlier, this is our last meeting for community observations in 2021. We're going to take a break for the holidays, but we are coming back hot in January with Optimize. So we are in the O in the tops now, I think. So anything in terms of, streamlining or automating or finding little tips and tricks to get things done faster and more efficiently. We are always looking for speakers. It's because of everybody who volunteers and raises their hand and wanting to help further community operations that we have been around for 8 months already. So if you have any success stories or tips and tricks or lessons learned, or just want to shed some wisdom on us, we would love to have you. So please feel free to email us. It's ops4community@gmail.com. And as Cassie mentioned, we're all over the place. So email, Slack, Insta, Twitter, whatever else there is, Morse code. Feel free to reach out to us.
Hit us up. And then with the final note, we do have our observation community where you can find past event decks and recordings here at this bit.ly link, which I will share in the chat right now. But also I did want to give a final note, shout out to Tiffany. Her birthday is tomorrow. So if everybody wish her a happy birthday, whether it be in the chat or on LinkedIn or Slack. I just, we've been doing this for 8 months. You've been a great co-leader, friend, and everything. So I just hope you have a great birthday and hope that it's filled with love.
Thank you, Cassie.
Of course. But yeah, y'all, did I put the chat in there? Because I was on, okay, the link. I was on in my fields right there, and then I immediately forgot, but I put it in there. So yeah, join us there, and then we'll see you in the new year. Thanks for joining, y'all.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks,
Bye.
everyone. Bye.
Bye.